Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the original TONEX and the TONEX One. Today's video won't be any sound demos or anything like that comparing the TONEX One with the original TONEX. I think there's a lot of content out there. In fact, the biggest question when the TONEX One was announced was, does it sound like the big one? You know, can it replace the big one if it sounds exactly the same? So I think that's pretty much been answered. And so then if that's what you're looking for, that would be my answers. Yes, sound-wise, you could replace one for another. I really wanted to just talk about my experience after having the TONEX One for a little bit versus the bigger one that I've had for probably 6 to 8 months now, I want to say. Most of my recent videos, if not all of them, have been using the bigger TONEX. So if you're looking to see what that sounds like, well, you can just look at probably any of my previous videos to this one. With that being said, let's talk about TONEX. So here are my original bigger TONEXs. I've used two because I play in stereo, have my board wired in stereo, and so I come out to two of these guys. But for the sake of the video, I'm just gonna hold on to one of them for now. The TONEX for me really was my first step into capture technology. I've been a modeler user for basically all my guitar playing career, and I've been a big user of the Line 6 stuff, plugins even on computers like the Neural DSP stuff, and I love all of that. I never got a chance to try a Kemper. I know it's probably one of the older capture technologies on the market, and you know, I'm talking toaster Kemper, not the newer profile player. Just never got to try one. And then when the Quad Cortex was announced, which is another amp capture technology, never got to try that either. So once I saw these guys announce the original big TONEXs, I really wanted to dip my toes into capture technology versus amp modeling technology like the Helix that I'd used for so long. So I could say the TONEX was a first for me in that regard. And I love the TONEX capture technology. It's been what I use in the recording environment and what I use live all the time. So let's move forward in time to when this guy is announced, the TONEX One. And I have it in my hand right now, and it still just doesn't feel real. I mean, just look at where we came from to where we landed with this thing, and it sounds the same. It's crazy to think about technology. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. When the TONEX One, before it was officially announced, I had a friend reach out to me and say, hey, have you seen these mock images and just these leaks of this TONEX One coming out? And he showed me some of the leaks and some of the pictures, and I saw this and I was like, this looks like a joke. There's no way that a company that just made this awesome, sophisticated box within, I think like a year, all of a sudden is making this with less features, no screen, just different things like less I/O. I was like, this is a joke, don't believe it. And I remember just giving him all the reasons as to why this would never exist, at least not for a while. Lo and behold, shortly after, this thing gets officially announced, and I'm eating my words. So let's talk pros and cons here. Let's start with the good things that I've found with this. The first and foremost has got to be the form factor. This thing is tiny. Like, it's hard to describe over camera just how tiny it is, but if I hold it up to the big one, I mean, let me see, if I lay 1, 2, 3, 3.5, maybe 4 could fit across that way. Of course, you know, not including cables. That is just crazy size factor to think about when you've had to have 2 of these. You're talking 6 to 8 little TONEX Ones could probably fit across the original TONEXs. And so that's, for me, is probably pro number 1, is just the size factor of having this on your board. If you were the kind of person that was running one of these on your board, well, that's a good hunk of real estate on your pedal board. And if you had 2, I can only imagine you're either running a lot less other pedals to accommodate these on your board, or you just have a really huge pedal board and you have a lot of real estate to be able to fit 2 of these on your board. Now, me personally, I decided to keep my main board small and actually run both of these along with a Daiso Plus DI box in a separate board. And so this way I was able to keep both of these off my board, still fit all my main pedals, and then just really, I was carrying around 2 pedal boards, one for the amps and one for all the effect pedals. The next pro I would say about this has got to be the USB-C. This is just a welcome addition. Everything from our laptops to iPhones, etc., is moving towards, if not already moved to, USB-C. So I have tons of little USB-C cables that just come with everything all around, and so being able to just grab any single one of them to be able to use this, such a convenience factor. The original one uses, I believe it's called USB-B. It's like that printer looking type of cable. So I still have that cable, but it's just a lot less common to be found. I feel like USB-C is just the standard now. It's everywhere, and it just makes things a lot easier to use when it comes to your computer and plugging this in. That ties into the next pro, is that the TONEX One, it can actually be USB-C powered. So it does have your regular 9-volt power there, but if you just plug this straight into your computer, you know, to edit the profiles or to even use this as an interface recording interface, it turns on just with the USB-C. So how convenient is that, right? Another pro I would say is using it as an overdrive. Now, you can totally use the big one for overdrives, and in fact, in some ways, it might even be better if you need multiple overdrives. You can have just 3 across the pedals, right? If you really needed that. But I usually just have 1 pedal per overdrive, and so if you told me, well, which one would you want to use an overdrive on, I'd probably take this one. Not probably, I would take this one, because of the small form factor. And so this could serve as an overdrive pedal on my board and take up minimal real estate. And then of course I can store multiple overdrives on this thing and just have them there ready to go whenever I needed them. So that's just super convenient if you were going to use it that way, to just have an overdrive pedal, kind of like your traditional stomp box, and just have this as opposed to this when you only needed 1. If you needed more, this is the way to go. But if you needed 1, absolutely, the TONEX One wins for me. Let's talk cons, because I've played with this live now a couple times, and I've been using it in the studio, and I've definitely run into some cons that I think are noteworthy. First and foremost for me in terms of cons is the lack of precision with this thing. Now, it could just be me being spoiled from the bigger ones, but having the screen and having the knobs tell you where the numerical value is of whatever effect you're adjusting was just huge. Especially if you're just using 1, not a big deal, but if you're using 2 and your amps are different and you're trying to keep parameters in relation to one another, it's a lot easier and a lot more precise to have the screen and dial that in. If you don't know what I'm talking about, let me plug this in and show you. Okay, so here's an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say I'm dealing with 2 big TONEXs and I have 2 different types of captures, but because of the captures, they are different volumes, and so I need to adjust them, right? So if you can see that on the screen, this tells me it's at 10, but I can adjust it to, I don't know, let's say 8, right? So I would keep this amp at 8, but I know this one is quieter than my other one, and that one actually needs to be set at 6. Well, I could always look at the screens and make sure they're exactly 8 and 6, or even decimal points, 8.5 to 6.5, whatever. But I could keep that relationship to one another, right? And so that just made it super handy if you ever had to adjust something, especially live, and you just quickly need to know, or quickly need to adjust something, you know, hey, this amp is always 2 numbers up or down from the other amp, and that just makes it a lot easier to adjust things. In comparison, on this guy, there is no screen. And so if let's say I'm working with 2 TONEX Ones and I know this one's a bit brighter, so I need to adjust the treble down a little bit, you pretty much just have to eyeball it and use your ears. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just less precise. Unless you just have the ability to notch these knobs exactly to one another, it's a lot harder to be precise and keep the relationship between 2 TONEX Ones as opposed to the big ones, again, just because of those numbers. I don't know if this one needs to be 1.7 down compared to another TONEX One or whatever. Like, I don't know. I would just have to say, hey, I got the notch a little under noon and the other notch needs to stay a little above noon. You know, it's just a lot harder to be precise when it comes to that. So that could just be a me thing from being spoiled with the bigger TONEX Ones for so long. For me, that's just one of the big cons that I've found when adjusting these. The next con I would say is not knowing where the knobs are set once you start moving them. So here's what I mean. The big knob, for example, is your volume of the overall TONEX One. And then if you hit the alternate button, it also serves as the gain for that preset and that amp you're on, right? So two different types of volume that we're talking about here. So if I, let's say, set the volume, I don't know, somewhere here, and then I hit the alternate button, and then I need the gain over here, well, again, you're just back to eyeballing and listening to it once you switch back to volume, because I know it's somewhere over here, but I can't have it exactly like a numerical value like on the big TONEX Ones, where if it was at 8 and then I move away or something, I know I can always come back exactly to 8. Here, you know, you may be just a little millimeter off from where you originally set it. I don't know, but you kind of just have to eyeball it and then again, use your ear. So just kind of ties into what I mentioned in the first con, and just not being as precise and not knowing where your knobs are set at. A lot of these knobs, in fact, I think all of them have a dual function. So if you set it on one function, hit the alternate, and then start messing with other functions, well, you don't know where you left it at unless you just got good eyes or something and just can memorize exactly where you left that little knob at. You'll never know. The last con I'd probably say for this is the polarity thing. If you've dealt with any captures or any two type of, you know, even real life amps, you know that you can run into phase issues when working with two different amps. With the original TONEXs, I have the Daiso Plus here, and it has the polarity reverse feature, that guy right there, that allows you to just flip the polarity and makes your amps in phase. I guess, you know, the original ones didn't have anything to help with that, and now neither does this. I was kind of hoping if there was a successor to the TONEX, it would have a feature like that built in, simply because, you know, IK Multimedia's got to know people are using these in stereo. A lot of people are using more than just one. So if you're using one, no big deal. But like for someone like me who plays in stereo pretty much predominantly all the time, that is something I always have to account for. And so I have this to account for it myself. And of course, there's other ways. If your front of house is knowledgeable and can do it for you, then they can just flip the polarity there on the console. So that's a pretty common and easy issue to fix. But nonetheless, I think for me, it would have been nice to just have the ability to do that within the TONEX itself. Maybe it's coming on the TONEX 2 if that's a thing, but on the TONEX One, if you're using two of them, you still have to account for polarity in some way if the captures that you're using are out of phase. So some closing thoughts between these two. Is the TONEX One enough to replace the big TONEX? In my opinion, yes it is. For me, I would get these dialed in and then really never touch them again and just treat them like real amps. You know, I wasn't switching between 100 different amp models. I was treating it like a real amp that I would have next to me, where I would set it, run my board into it, and not go switch amps mid-song or anything like that. So for me, it was a set and forget type of thing. And so even though the TONEX One, as I outlined, is a little harder to be precise with, in my opinion, a little harder to dial in with another amp, once you do have it set, you can just lock the controls and then never touch it again type of thing. And so that's really how I've been using these, is the same way that I've used the big ones and just feeding my pedal board into it. Once I got it dialed in, I just set it and forget it. I think the hugest reason why I would recommend the TONEX One, if you're looking to either get into capture or replace your big ones, is the real estate. Like I mentioned, this thing is just so small compared to the big one. If you're like me and you just need a good amp, set it and forget it type of thing, this is king. You cannot beat this, especially for the price point. I believe it's like $179. It doesn't have the screen and a bunch of the features like MIDI. I forgot to mention that if you need MIDI, this does not have MIDI. The big one does. So that's another pro or con depending on your setup. But for the value and sounding exactly the same pretty much, this is hard to beat. So absolutely, I would totally recommend, if you're looking to replace your big one or just get some amp solution, the TONEX One is the way to go. So that's gonna do it for this video. Hopefully it's helped answer some pros and cons that you might have had questions on when it comes to the smaller TONEX and the bigger TONEX. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.